Everybody. We just finished a really busy day at the store, and we're really excited tonight to have Alia Volz here, and she's going to talk about her new book called Home Baked, and it's the story of her mom and the stoning of San Francisco. So, hi Samantha, hi Alia.
Hi.
Glad to hear you had a busy day.
Yeah, we had a really busy day.
Great.
I literally just walked in the door.
Fantastic.
That's great. Welcome. Well, I just want to jump in and say that I was so excited to get a hold of this book, and thank you, Kathleen, for ordering it for me so that I had time to read it. And I'm not quite finished, but if there's spoilers, that's fine. I've really loved this book, and I made a quick little video about it. Hopefully some people saw it. And one of the things I commented on was it's an incredible memoir about your life and your parents' life, but it's also, I felt like it's a memoir to the city as well. And I learned about San Francisco, like I learned so much about that time in the city. So that was just one of the things I loved. So I'm just really excited. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad you got that takeaway from it.
Yeah. So do you, Kathleen, what do you think? Should we start with a reading?
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, one thing I wanted to mention, what people don't know, that another thing Alia does, which I've seen her in action, is she does the storytelling nights. I saw you in Oakland a year or two ago, telling, the storytelling nights at the bars.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. I was
It's
trying to get the balls to go up and do one myself, and I didn't happen.
and actually I'm involved in a storytelling night on Zoom on Sunday that I think is called Sunday Night Stories. I think that's right, but it's a fundraiser for Alley Cat Books and Dog Eared Books.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, because I'd love to come for that, because that's someone. Is Maggie doing it with you?
Maggie. So it's not related to We Love Bookstores.
Okay.
Yeah, We Love Bookstores, as you know, but maybe your audience doesn't know, is a collective of authors and booksellers and book lovers in general who have gotten together to organize big name Zoom events to raise for independent bookstores.
We were really lucky to be one of your beneficiaries already, and I can't tell you guys how much I appreciate you guys.
It's been so much fun, and it just feels good to do something. We're all stuck at home, and it feels good to be able to build community anyway.
Well, I mean, you guys picked the two of my favorite people to do the benefit for us. Nina and Jandy have been friends for years, so it was really wonderful that you guys picked them.
I think she picked you.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think we always ask the author if there's a particular indie that they're excited to support.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Try to start there.
Best.
Yeah.
And you've been, what people don't realize, you've been in the book selling community for years. We've vicariously known each other through many different avenues over the years, from Kathy Goldmark all the way through,
Yeah. Well, I married a bookstore, which is to say I married a bookstore owner who came with a bookstore. And I would have walked the entire bookstore down the aisle, I would have. But yes, my husband was one of the co-owners of Green Apple Books for 30 years, approximately. He has just stepped away to focus on other things before all of this hit. But so he was very involved in the bookstore, and I was just glad to be part of that community, of course. I don't know.
Lucky. We have an amazing community.
Yeah, we're very lucky here in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And one of the positive things that has come out of this situation that we're all in, the pandemic, is that we're able to share our literary community with a broader audience. I think that's really exciting. And we're also able to experience the literary communities of other places from the comfort of our day pajamas.
So why don't do you want to do a brief reading and
Sure. Oh, listen. Sorry about that. I have my door open here. And speaking of my husband, he's probably heard me do do this enough.
Hi, Kevin.
Okay, so I'm going to read, I'll just read from a little bit from the prologue. And let's see. I'm going to do a little slideshow. There's a lot of really fun photographs and artwork that go along with the book. And so I like to share this while I'm reading. Okay, are you seeing that?
Yeah.
Cool.
Looks great.
All right. Prologue, on the barge. When I was 9, my public elementary school participated in a program best known by the slogan, "Dare to Keep Kids Off Drugs." It was one of Nancy Reagan's pet projects, a prong of her Just Say No campaign. One afternoon per week, the entire 4th grade crowded into the cafeteria where a uniformed policeman lectured us about the perils of narcotics like marijuana. We learned techniques for deflecting peer pressure and identifying and avoiding dealers, and we broke into work groups to play act situations. I was careful to follow the program's script. I knew how to keep a secret. At home, there were giant black garbage bags of Mendocino shake crammed into the closet of our spare bedroom, along with pounds of fragrant, manicured buds sealed in gallon Ziplocs. My mom had operated Sticky Fingers Brownies, a massive, profoundly illegal marijuana edibles business, since before I was born. Throughout my infancy, she and her partners distributed upward of 10,000 brownies per month. It was the first known business to it was the first known business of its kind to operate at that scale in California. By the age of 9, I was helping my mom bake and individually wrap brownies on weekends. Sometimes I tagged along on deliveries after school. We were the people the cop warned my class about. By 1987, the year of my first DARE lessons, AIDS was ravaging my hometown. People I loved as surrogate aunties and uncles were suffering gruesome, agonizing illnesses. Cannabis eased their discomfort and helped curb the deadly wasting syndrome. After-school deliveries had become tours of sick beds. I had been my mom's accomplice since I was in the stroller. Some of my earliest flashes of memory are from brownie runs back when San Francisco had a Technicolor glow. I grew up believing that I was made of my hometown, that there was no difference between me and the place I was born. My family secrets sometimes isolated me from other kids, but secrets also act as a bonding agent between those in the know. I was never neglected like some hippie children were. I was fawned over, encouraged, welcomed into the conspiracy. An outcast at school, I was inner circle within the Sticky Fingers world, the coolest of the cool kids. And wherever we lived, the inner sanctum of the inner circle was my mom's king-size bed, nicknamed the barge. Many customers became trusted friends. She'd invite them aboard, and they'd sprawl sideways or belly down and converse for hours, unpacking relationship troubles, planning career changes, swapping stories. Equal parts therapist couch, executive boardroom, and ladies' lounge, the barge was a place for sharing and intimacy. It was also where my mom counted stacks of hundreds and 50s. I'll stop this one there. And we're back.
So, Alia, how long did it take you to write the book, and what was your mother's reaction to all the positive? You've gotten some really great reviews, and you've gotten some really great press.
Thank you. It was a long project. I started this an embarrassing number of years ago, 12 years ago, I think, was when I began interviewing. Now, I began this as an oral history. I did a lot of interviewing and research before I knew what the book was going to be like. And I actually shopped it back in 2009 as an oral history. And it didn't sell. It was roundly rejected by every publishing house in New York. At the time, the main comment from editors was that cannabis was too niche of a subject. So that changed in the intervening years. When I went back out with it 10 years later, the response was completely different. It just goes to show how much America's relationship has changed with medical marijuana. And the book had evolved quite a bit since then as well.
Well, I don't know if you know that I have a personal connection, because my sister's been in the medical marijuana business for about 15, 20 years.
Okay.
And she's, you know, she's competed at the Emerald Cup and stuff like that. And I have to say that I personally am a big fan of tinctures and do the sleep tinctures every night. But I remember when it was like such a bad thing, even though we were all doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I am truly a child of the Bay Area of the 80s. So I always tell everybody, I remember before there was AIDS.
Right, right. I might be like you. I don't use marijuana recreationally very often. I mean, occasionally if I feel like it, but I'm not a big pot smoker or. I have found some things that help with sleep. I have terrible insomnia, and there are a couple of things that are very helpful with that. Or for aches and pains, things like that. I use it more on the medicinal side myself, although I have no judgment whatsoever for people who use it recreationally. It just, I think one aspect of growing up in a weed family where it's just so much a part of the world is there's no chance to rebel. It was never bad in my home. I never had to sneak, and that kind of takes the fun out of it. It loses some of its mystique.
My stepson has the same reaction.
But I care a lot about access, obviously, and I'm not going to say I came of age, but I went through important stages of my childhood at the height, or let's call it the nadir, the worst part of the AIDS epidemic here in San Francisco. And I have a very personal experience of how soothing it was to the people who were using it then. And it's just a very visceral connection to the medical aspect of the movement, the medical uses of the plant. And so I feel very strongly about that.
Well, you know, reading it and when you read the book and you see what your mother was doing, your mother was actually a practitioner. She was giving people comfort along with fun.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've noticed that over the years. I mean, you know, the older we get, the less we're likely to do things recreational. We begin to do them medicinally.
Right. Well,
and I
yeah.
honestly say it's made me a nicer person. I always thank my sister for that. She makes it especially for me, the sleep potion.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Yeah. Well, she does it from the science point. You know what I mean? She's like your mom. I mean, it wasn't just let's go out and party. It's like, let's also make people feel better.
Right. Well, my mom transitioned and through that period, and that was one of the reasons that I really wanted to tell this story, is that I didn't feel like it had been told in a very compelling way. The story of how marijuana moved from being a party drug to a panacea, to a broadly used medicine. And now that we're on the other side of it, there are people on both sides of the aisle and all political persuasions who understand that cannabis has medical properties and are willing to look at that. But back in the day, pre-AIDS, nobody was talking about that, or the group that was very, very small. You know, it was only discussed in relation to glaucoma or chemotherapy-related nausea, and even then, it was very much kept under wraps. So it was associated with. And when my mom came out to San Francisco and started her business, she was in it to party and be creative, and it was all about the art and community. This culture was very much about community, hanging out, spending time with people, collaborating on art projects and theater projects and things like that. So that was the world that I was born into. But a few years later, the AIDS epidemic hit, and it hit our whole community so incredibly hard. And people who had already been my mom's friends and customers for years got sick and died. Many of them died, and it, you know, it was such a devastating time. But it became clear fairly early on that cannabis was helpful with some of the symptoms. Obviously, weed wasn't going to cure AIDS, but it helped with some of the most crippling symptoms that people were dealing with. And there was no adequate pharmaceutical response until 1996. So the first 15 years of the epidemic, there really wasn't something that was keeping people alive. So there was a clear transition, and I believe that the evidence bears out that we would not have the kind of access that we have today, the kind of recreational access we have today, without the AIDS epidemic and the tireless activism of AIDS activists through the 80s and 90s. And so when I saw that part of the conversation dropping out, you know, in the lead up to Prop 64 and recreational legalization, people weren't talking about the real forerunners of the movement anymore, and they weren't talking about the fact that 380,000 people died before the first marijuana legislation of AIDS. So like, there's a connection there that I didn't see being made. And so that kind of became the political interest behind the book. Obviously, it's also a family story. But,
well, I mean, I also think it's kind of a love story to the city.
yeah. I have a very personal relationship with San Francisco. The San Francisco I relate to so strongly no longer exists outside of very limited circles. And I grew up hearing such incredible stories about these culture pockets, these subcultures and activist movements that were thriving in San Francisco in the 70s and 80s, that some of them are extremely influential and change the broader culture and are not well documented. So I started feeling a kind of a weight of responsibility to preserve those stories and weave them into the broader history of San Francisco. I felt they were slipping away.
Sorry, I was muting. Yeah, I mean, I went to San Francisco State in the 80s and was very involved kind of in the partying scene of the 80s in San Francisco. I do remember when all this was coming, and I do remember your mom's product. I know, I've just totally aged myself. That's why when the book came out, I was like laughing. I said, I know this product. I've actually used it. But you know, I thought that it wasn't just it was a story of your mom being like a rebel too, and your mom living outside the box and raising you to think outside the box, mm-hmm. which I think is a gift any parent can give a child.
I do too.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's why, you know, we have a creative energy about us, is because we were allowed to think outside the box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've also noticed that a lot of times the memoirs of hippie children tend to be trauma driven. And I think this is mostly just because memoirs in general are often trauma driven because it's dramatic. It makes a good story. And so those stories get told. The stories of hippie kids who grew up to be just fine and who were not neglected by their parents and who found the environment stimulating, those stories don't often get told. So I also felt like there was a space that I could fill there to communicate a more positive experience with alternative parenting.
Well, I mean, I get a little tired of reading memoirs where everybody, all their issues stem from their parents. I mean, right. In some ways, what I liked about yours in particular is I felt it was kind of the opposite of that. Mm-hmm. I felt like your mom knew she had a creative kid. She knew that she needed to encourage that, and your mom lived a life that was not, what my parents were doing. My parents were definitely not. They had no idea what we were doing. So we had a very good time rebelling because my parents had no clue. But I also thought that there was such genuine love in your family.
Mhm.
The different, between your mom, your dad, and the different people that came in and out who made your family. And I mean, that's one thing that I think is very, very similar to being in the book industry is there is a love amongst us. And it's kind of because we're living outside the box.
Mhm.
We've chosen a lifestyle that is never going to make us a lot of money, but we get to do what we love every day. And I kind of felt that was your mom's story too.
Sure.
Except she did make probably more money than we do, but I mean, she also put a lot of stuff at risk.
Yes, and she certainly did not retire rich. Actually, she did not retire at all. She's a working artist, and that's an extremely hard boat to row. She does well enough teaching and selling paintings, but it is very difficult. Anything you dedicate yourself to that is outside of the straight and narrow automatically is going to have greater challenges and also greater rewards if you're that type. I feel so privileged to be able to write for a living, even though it's incredibly difficult and a very hard way to make a living. Oh, you're muted, Kathleen.
Alia,
Myself.
Alia, you mentioned that you had some other book recommendations
Oh, sure.
to share with us. We like to ask people, our authors, for recommendations for reading during a pandemic here. So.
Yes. So I wanted to recommend books by California authors, and specifically California authors whose books are coming out during the pandemic. We need extra support. We're not getting the kind of launch that most people do, and so these books need a little extra attention to get out into the world, get the attention they should. First up, Miracle Country by Kendra Atleeworth. Oh, there we go. That's probably backwards, but this is a stunning memoir. She's really an essayist, and it's a beautiful meditation on place. She's from Bishop, so it's about the high desert, the lonely and beautiful high desert and the environmental challenges that created it. But it's also a really striking memoir of an alternative family, again with a very positive relationship. Her writing about her dad, who she calls Pop, is just gorgeous. But there's a lot of love for California. It's beautifully researched. It's gorgeously written. She's kind of a Didion of our time. I'm just going to say that. Stunning. That is out in a couple of weeks. Great to pre-order it now. It's out mid-June, I think. Fiebre Tropical. This is a Bay Area writer, Juliana Delgado Lobra. This book is set in Miami. It's a novel, and it's just fabulously, like, riotously funny, deliciously experimental with language, deliciously queer, deliciously subversive. It's a great coming of age story that pulls no punches, and I'm absolutely nuts about it. And she's here in the Bay Area, or they are here in the Bay Area. And then finally, The Heart and Other Monsters by Rose Anderson. This is also forthcoming. Great to pre-order it now. This memoir just absolutely slayed me. She grew up in Humboldt, and this is a woman who is researching the death of her sister, who died supposedly of a drug overdose, but it becomes questionable. And it's a really striking exploration of grief and addiction and haunting, and a great true crime novel, a really unusual kind of true crime novel. So those are my picks for the moment.
Thank you. Those look great. So we'll put up a website with links to all of those books when we post this on our Facebook page.
Wonderful.
So one of the things I noticed that most of the books that you're recommending are memoir. Are you a memoir person or are you a fiction person?
I have become a memoir person. I'm a very reluctant memoirist. I was writing fiction primarily and then I started doing the oral histories, and it was only really through the oral histories that it became obvious that in order to, I should say, when the oral history project didn't fly, when that didn't sell, I put it down for a long time. And by the time I picked it up again, I had realized that it really needed a first-person narrator. It needed that central focus and that heart and kind of that somebody to poke the story and somebody to guide the reader through it. And I realized I had to write a memoir, which wasn't the first thing I wanted to do. But I found a lot of pleasure and excitement in asking unanswerable questions in a way that really, I really found a way into that in the memoir world. Although it's still, I would say that Home Baked is not a traditional memoir in the sense that I'm born halfway through the book and I don't have a point of view until the last quarter. It's really much more about the culture surrounding my parents. They sometimes call it a memoir. It's much more about her than it is about me. And it's not a traditional coming of age story. But so I have a particular interest in the research-driven memoir, I will say. So it's like, I think that as a subgenre in a way of books that are an investigation of a topic. You're not looking at your belly button, you're going outside of yourself, but that you can use the tools of a first-person narrator to open that subject up to people. And both The Heart and Other Monsters and Miracle Country are that kind of book. They're very much about topics outside of the author's own brain. Fiebre Tropical, this is a novel.
So I have just like one more question for you. What's on deck for you next, Alia?
Another bizarre family story. If you can believe it, it is even weirder than this last one. My family just gets more eccentric the farther back you go. And so this is going to be a ghost story, an ostensibly true ghost story about my great-grandmother, who married a ghost and wrote a memoir about it. And so I have this material to work with, and I'm trying to find my way into the story. It's kind of crazy. I don't know what to do with it, but I'm trying to start so that I don't sit here and freak out about launching a book during a pandemic.
Well, I think you did great. I mean, so many people are so into this book. I know a lot of people in the industry are really excited about the book too, because it's such a positive spin on what the industry is. I mean, the industry is a very familial industry, kind of like the book industry.
Right. I didn't know if you were talking about books or pot.
Both. I mean, both industries are very familial.
Yeah, I think so. That might be why I like the book world so much. It feels homey.
It feels like you're at home.
Yeah, exactly. So one thing I wanted to share with you all is some of the original bags. So one of the features of this story is that my parents distributed their brownies in bags that they designed every week. My parents are both artists. And so they would do these bags. Oh, is it backwards? It is, isn't it?
Nope, it's perfect.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, it's totally readable.
So they would do these unique hand-drawn bags every week. They're just like lunch bags, and each one holds a dozen brownies. And it would always be some kind of commentary on something that was going on in the city or something they were thinking about. It might be, you know, an astrological thing. This is probably Cancer. It might be a spiritual thing. And people collected them. There was a new one every week, and it became like an underground comic that they would use to communicate their ideas with the city. And so it's just kind of fun to share that. I was able to use them as chapter headers in the book, but there's nothing quite like a physical object.
Those are great.
I don't know if I should do another short reading or if we should wrap up. What do you think? We can.
Sure, if you have another short reading, that'd be great.
Let's see. Where are we at? 7:30. Okay, yeah, I'll do one more little section here. This will be from later in the story, and I think I'll read from the very beginning of the transition from party drug to panacea, the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. And let me go back. Well, that's okay. I'll skip the slideshow this time. December 1981, Mare did a pre-Christmas brownie run. She was making her way up Castro Street toward Market when she saw a small crowd studying a poster outside the Star Pharmacy. She leaned in to check it out. Gay Cancer, it said across the top. Below that was a series of graphic Polaroid photos of sores on a man's legs, feet, and arms. The back of Mare's neck prickled. Hadn't she seen one of those little spots on Roger's wrist that afternoon? Weird, she thought, as she continued on to do the next deal. I should say Mare is my mom. That's already obvious. The flyers were the work of Bobby Campbell, a handsome 29-year-old registered nurse studying to be a nurse practitioner who specialized in gay men's health. Mare had occasionally sold Bobby brownies at Cafe Flora. A couple of days, Bobby Campbell was among the first people diagnosed with Kaposi sarcoma. He was also one of the first in the country to sense the enormity of the danger. As a public health nurse, he was not going to sit back and watch. Declaring himself the Kaposi sarcoma poster boy, Bobby began a column in the San Francisco Sentinel, a gay newspaper, detailing his experiences. His first piece, I Will Survive, ran that month. The tone of the column was buoyant and witty, but it dispensed crucial information. And although Bobby would not, in fact, survive, he would die within 4 years, he became a hero of the AIDS epidemic. Until that point, there had been a few AP articles buried with other low-priority news. Rare skin cancer seen in young homosexuals, fatal pneumonia caused by a common fungus. It was enough to interest a couple of journalists and concern some doctors, but there were still fewer than 300 identified cases nationwide. It started in that small way. Whispers, rumors, something going around, people feeling fatigued and vaguely ill, a recurring flu, a stomach bug that wouldn't quit, those painless purple spots showing up out of nowhere. It was still business as usual in the Castro, and business was good enough. With Mare coming down once a month, customers stocked up on large quantities of brownies. Beck's Motor Lodge could be rowdy on weekends, popular among Castro boys for both cruising and tricking for money. On the plus side, that meant people came and went for various reasons, which Mare thought gave her cover. Safe to say, Beck's personnel didn't want to know what people did in their rooms. Sunshine, a photographer and cook who'd been a customer for years, usually bought 5 or 6 dozen. She'd sell some to friends and keep the rest in her freezer to last through the next visit. Sunshine remembers approaching Beck's and seeing a buck-naked guy standing in the picture window overlooking Market Street. She thought it was weird, so she mentioned it to Mare, who shrugged it off. Apparently, it was this guy's deal to hang out nude in the front window so he could cruise without ever having to put clothes on or walk down to the street. His tricks could come up and find him. Sunshine also remembers there always being a child there. She'd enter the motel room and Mare would whisper, "Shh, Alia's sleeping." It's not true that I was there every time, but I adored going to the city with my mom. As we sailed through puffs of fog crossing the bridge, we'd belt out, "San Francisco, here we come, da-da-da, right back where we started from." I loved the sound of traffic below the motel windows. I loved customers waltzing through the door with a sing-song, "Hello, darlings." How the damp night air would trail them, clinging to their leather jackets and smelling of the street and the ocean. How their hair was never shaggy like up north, but spiked and dyed bright colors or coiffed into artful shapes. I loved shrill city laughter, the boldness of it, the magic of carelessly caring so much about everything. I loved going to Sylvester's, that sumptuous wonderland of fabric and antiques and music. But I especially loved the barge, which was any bed my mom captained, just floating along on a squeaky motel bed with the grown-ups. The whisper of money in my mom's hands, the dry snap of rubber bands when she counted it out at the end of the weekend. If that environment was too much for a girl of 4 and 5, I didn't notice. My mom was there. I was safe.
Nice. Thank you.
That was beautiful, Leah. I want to thank you so much for joining us. I'm so sad that we didn't get to do this in the store, but I'm hoping next year for the paperback.
I hope so too. I hope so too. I would love that. Yeah, thank you very much.
I have to say I'm a big fan, and I love your stories. I've actually heard you read a couple times in the storytelling realm. So I can't wait to see the next book, and I'm so proud of you. And what an accomplishment! And thank you so much for joining us tonight.
It's really, really a pleasure, and I'm so glad to hear that you're busy and you're doing good. Everybody out there, buy books from indie bookstores. We're nothing without this community.
Yeah, we're very blessed to be a part of this community.
Yeah.
And we're blessed to have you in it. And what you're doing for independent booksellers right now is, it verges on sainthood, in my opinion.
It really feels good to be able to do a little something. It's been very uplifting for me. And Marianne in the audience pointed out that the storytelling event on Sunday to raise money for Alley Cat and Dog Eared is called 6 Feet Apart. And so that's one thing folks can do. And also please check out We Love Bookstores. We have 2 events a week. Each one goes to a dedicated bookstore with every bit of donated money going straight into their PayPal account. So hope people will keep checking out for that.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.